welcome back to the Debrief Podcast presented by FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, joined as always by Jackie Augustine, and boy, do we have some news to talk about this week. It was going to be a packed show anyway.
Right, we had to bump some things.
And then I came down with a cold last week, and we had to delay, and then after the weekend we're saying, thank God I got a cold, right? That's what we're saying.
Well, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank God Josh got sick.
I'm glad you're feeling better. But you're right.
There was some huge news that broke out of Geneva literally just yesterday.
Yes.
I mean, it happened on Friday, but it just broke yesterday in the Finger Lakes Times. The news that city leadership and administrative leadership in Geneva is going to be going through a little bit of a changing period.
And quickly.
Quickly.
So
unexpectedly.
Right. So, Matt Horn, city manager, announced that he, effective early January.
I believe January 12th was the date.
Yes, he's resigning. He's moving on to a new, better opportunity. Great. I'm excited for him for that.
Definitely.
But I didn't see that coming. And this is really not a great time, in my view, for Geneva to have to undergo this kind of transition because, as I've said on this show several times, for better or worse, Matt has been the kind of policy glue that has kept a lot of things from completely running off the rails. So, the fact that he's going to be leaving is going to create a huge gap in terms of policy. Now, let me just say, in full disclosure, a city manager should not be that critical to your policy in general. That's not how the position should operate. If you had a strong council, that is not how the position would operate. But Matt, again, he and I have had our disagreements on a lot of issues, but he has been able to steer a very unruly ship through some pretty rough water. So I'm with incredible success along the way. Yes, there's been lots of great stuff. So I'm very concerned, really, about the institutional. Oh, no, not the institutional. I mean, I think City Hall is going to run just fine because I think he's put together an excellent team. I think the staff can do what needs to be done for stuff that's in motion. Mm-hmm. So I don't have an institutional concern. I do have a governing concern because, without Matt there, city council's actually going to have to step up and do the stuff that city councils should be doing. And I think they have people on there who can do it, but those aren't necessarily the people that get listened to, and they aren't necessarily the people who were ready to really kind of get in there. So, it's going to be interesting. And now this council is going to have to manage a job which, in my view, is one of the most important tasks that any city council has to undertake, which is hiring a new chief executive officer. How they're going to do that, how they're going to manage it, is going to be really interesting. I mean, it's a good opportunity for the city to really think about how the role of city manager has functioned. And I'm not talking about personalities. I'm not talking about how Matt has functioned. I'm saying how the office has functioned, both the things that people love about it and the things that people have not been as happy about, and see if there's maybe a different way of doing things. I'm not saying go away from city manager, because I do think that Geneva could not and would not be well served by moving to a strong mayor form of government, where it would be city council doing those functions, those executive functions. I do not think that's the way to go. But, I guess the question is, what actually do they want a city manager to do? Because they've got to answer that question before they can go out and try to figure out who is the best fit to do that. And I got to say, I've been thinking about it since yesterday, right? I mean, I opened the paper. It was a huge surprise. And immediately started thinking, well, who in the world is going to do that job? And I've been on 2 city manager search committees, right? So when I first got into office, we brought in Rich Rising. Okay, and then 8 years later, we brought in Matt, and those were two totally different processes. They yielded two totally different candidates, and yeah, I think this council's got to think long and hard about how they want to structure this, because the process they use is going to determine the quality of candidate that they get.
So, I judging from the media perspective, I guess I'm coming at this from the perspective of a reporter, editor, someone who covers the news. Matt appears to be a policy and procedure guy. He seems to be a systems guy, like the kind of person that you would, in theory, want in that type of role. It would be my hope that the city would just say, okay, these were all the really awesome qualities about Matt Horn, and these are all the reasons why we've been super successful because of those efforts and those qualities. Now let's try and find a person who matches.
Right.
I guess it is a little bit concerning, and I guess maybe you could speak to this a little more. Having sat through some recent city council meetings and listening to the dialogue, and there does seem to be a disconnect between the community or parts of the community and city council.
Right.
And it seems to me that, and this goes way beyond just Matt Horn, but it seems like parts of the city, the functional part of the city that is operating, 28, 29 days out of the calendar month, is listening. They are paying attention. Mm-hmm. The hope is that continues. And I guess that my concern would be that, you talk about switching to a strong mayoral position as opposed to a chief executive officer. That, to me, that would be a terrible idea.
I agree.
I think that's a terrible idea in any scenario because when you rely on an electoral process, look at all the elections that we've seen for different supervisory roles and things like that. You don't always get the best candidate. And this is just a matter of it's a way to get the best candidate by actually going through a selection process where you interview people, talk to different candidates, see what different kinds of people bring to the table. And, this is an opportunity for city council to rally around the community in terms of valuing what the community has to say about the next city manager.
Yes, that absolutely.
Not just reading some editorials in the newspaper or listening to somebody rant on a podcast or something, but actually taking that input and doing something with it in the process. And I think that, and to me, I think the really troubling situation whenever you have a scenario like this play out is that when things are good, they're great. But as soon as like a great candidate or a great person like Matt leaves, there's no policy in place to quickly transition into that. Okay, these are the steps we need to follow right now so that the city can be back on track and can go through this process of getting someone into that role sooner than later.
Right. Well, I want to take issue with one thing that you're saying. I don't consider Matt to be the rainmaker of all wonderful things in Geneva, okay? I do think he has been an integral part of getting that momentum going. Mm-hmm. So I'm not as worried that his exit means that all of the progress all of a sudden stops. Because while he was important to getting to that point, the community, I think, really has a lot of buy-in for the stuff that's really sustainable, that's going to keep going. And the city staff is excellent, in my view. So, I think they are poised to jump right in. So I'm not worried about continuity on that end. But where Matt really was the linchpin of operations was council. And again, I'm not saying that should be the role of a city manager, but absent anybody else assuming a leadership position, that is what he did. He put together the agenda, structured the kind of the briefings about how people would frame the issue, helped to keep some order at the meetings, and then had to execute whatever the decisions were and explain to council what the consequences of their particular choices would be. So in my view, council really has to step up and be way more active, because they don't have him as a crutch at this point. And that is where I worry that the stuff that's in motion right now will continue, but there's stuff coming up that they need to start talking about. I mean, they're going to have a retreat coming up in January, and they need to be able to pull some of that weight themselves now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in just kind of responding to one of the points you made, I think I'm not suggesting that Matt was the end-all or, the 100% fix in Geneva, but you just mentioned something that I'm gonna paraphrase as politics. You have to have someone who essentially can be that middleman,
right,
who can rein in city council,
yeah,
explain to them what's actually happening, because as a part-time city councilor, as any part-time elected official, you don't have that grasp on like what the day-to-day always looks like.
Well, they could, but you're right. Mostly.
But in a that's where you get back into this whole like debate about what's expected of a part-time elected official, and everyone has jobs and that kind of thing. So I just I see the greatest room for error in that segment of the, because all of the people who currently work in City Hall and currently work for the city, they're going to keep doing their jobs the way they always have. But when you lose that connect, or when you lose that person who's able to say, okay, enough's enough, these are the options, figure out what you want to do and do it, it puts you in a precarious position where politics could bleed into it, and you could suddenly have an even more politically divisive decision cycle process happening.
Yep.
And that would be a huge loss for Geneva, because that would, I think, turn the clock back faster.
I agree with you.
On a lot of the progress.
That is what I'm worried about. Yeah.
But I will say this. Geneva has a lot of active community members and a lot of people who are vocal and involved regularly. So I think, if nothing else, the mistakes and the issues and the things that concern people will continue to be presented. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to disappear. I don't think this will be a process that sort of like falls into the dark alley in the back where nobody knows what's going on. I think it'll be pretty public, and it should hopefully, in theory, probably could be a flawless process if they've buckled down and get it done.
Yeah.
I don't want to be so cynical of city council, because I know there is a lot of cynicism right now in Geneva around city council.
Yeah, there is.
And it's just one of those things. Like at some point, you have to have some level of trust, even if you don't agree, even if you don't necessarily align ideologically. You still have to be able to conduct business.
Right.
And that's where it comes down to. Good change can come, but you got to solve the problems along the way and not fall into some old habits.
Right.
But that's not the only issue in Geneva that you wanted to talk about and that we wanted to talk about on the show today. Actually, this was the next topic is the original thing we were going to talk about in Geneva is the whole residency resolution, which was rushed in the final hours right before the meeting, according to some. Others said it was placed on the agenda several days beforehand. But talk to us a little bit about where this is or what this was.
Well, so the question was that Chief Trickler, Chief of Police, when he was hired, City Council had previously passed a resolution saying that your chief enforcement officers needed to live in the city. And so that was kind of the initial background against which he was hired. When he was hired, I was on city council at that time, we knew he had either just moved or built a house or something like right over the line. And so there was some discussion about, okay, well, we'll give some time in order to allow him time to find a new house. Mm-hmm. Well, there was some discussion, and I admit these details are not crisp in my mind because this is not an issue that I even remembered until it came up, right, in public discussion. But looking back on it, I do remember that there was a discussion that, we would give this kind of grace period window and that there would be some relocation stipend. But I think the assumption of everybody was the way it would work in private industry, the person moves, they get the relocation stipend, and everything's fine. So at some point it came up again that he hadn't moved yet, and it was reiterated that, well, we're still holding firm that that's what we'd like to see. And then I guess fast forward to now, right? New council, new set of eyes on everything, and somebody or a couple of somebodies are asking, why didn't he ever have to move? And by the way, he already got the $2,500 and didn't move. So it seemed to me like it should have been fairly simple for city council to deal with this. They should have said, you were paid for something you didn't do, so you've got to pay it back. And now we've got to ask this question, is the residency requirement something we want to stand behind? And they had three options, right? Yes, we stand behind the residency requirement, and that means now you have to move. We stand behind the residency requirement in general, but given the fact that you haven't had to abide by it this time, and we actually don't think it has affected policing, we'll make an exception for you, but we're not rescinding the requirement. Or we don't think residency requirements actually make sense the way that we initially conceived them, so we'd like to revisit that issue. The discussion was none of the above. The discussion was, do we like him? I don't know. It turned into a referendum on a person instead of a discussion of policy. And I just thought, this was our original issue to talk about, and then the thing about Matt came to light, and I thought, oh man, against this backdrop, my confidence is low. But yeah, it was just the discussion went much longer than was needed for what they were actually discussing, because what they were actually discussing was not relevant to what needed to be discussed. And now I still don't think anybody's clear about what happened. I mean, if you ask some counselors, they'll say, yes, we're getting the $2,500 back. If you ask other counselors, they think, yes, we're getting the $2,500 back and we removed the residency requirement. But I think the resolution they passed said that they're just making an exception for him right now, and that they'll accept the money if he pays it back. But there wasn't a timeline for returning it or any kind of consequence if it wasn't returned. So it all feels very lukewarm and unfocused. And I think people just left thinking, boy, it doesn't give us a lot of confidence that people really know what they're doing.
Yeah, it was. So I wasn't at that meeting, but I watched the meeting live. And I was I had some takeaways after the meeting, and then I had a new set of takeaways after I sort of started to watch the reaction from the passage and the news stories that came out about it.
Right.
There was a little bit of a dialogue out there that I was reading that some people were kind of skeptical about whether, while Matt Horn was delivering his sort of point by point how we got here, that he was making up the attempts that the chief allegedly made to repay the stipend, the $2,500 stipend, and he came back and he said, "Well, no, because that'll let you off the hook."
Right.
And to me, that seemed like the right way for him to approach it, because it's ultimately city council's decision. It's not the city manager's decision. And I think I was more troubled by the fact that city council had not taken action on this for so long. And it had just kind of existed in the background.
Right.
And
yeah, and I'm part of that. I totally accept responsibility.
I believe they said 6 years, because he's been on the job for 6 years.
6 years. So that means the last 4 years that I was on council, because it's been 2 years since, that I think that there was just this assumption that we had communicated that we wanted him to move, and eventually he was going to move. But I know when I'm making up my list of, what's coming before the city and what do I need to ask at the meetings, and what I don't think I ever was on my radar screen like, oh, did the chief ever move?
Now, one of the things that I'd heard was that this was something that a few residents had voiced concern about before at some point. That was the suggestion. That was what, after listening to all of the collective comments, it seemed like this wasn't the first time that this came up.
Well, I mean, that's why the residency requirement was passed in the first place. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is not an issue that people don't care about. I mean, there has been a lot of discussion about where city employees of all levels should live and whether we should restrict them and what we could require of them. So, yeah, this is not a new issue, and it's certainly, I mean, council took it up before. That's how we ended up with the policy, was people were interested in it. So, yeah, I can't imagine. It surprised me that some people felt surprised by the issue, because if you're paying attention to what the community's talking about, this has been on the radar screen.
And it seems like there's a history of the residents caring more about this than city council has or does now. And I guess, in Seneca County, the Seneca County Board of Supervisors recently went through their own little residency debate where they were trying to understand, like, where they should draw the line in the sand. And Fayette Supervisor Cindy Lorenzetti really threw herself out on a limb and said, look, we should have a strict policy about this one way or another. Either get rid of it completely or keep it, because when you start to go into these scenarios where you're judging it on a case-by-case basis, you set up for this, what you're describing as being a personality war.
Right.
And I think both sides, honestly, I thought both sides, after listening to I didn't listen to all of the public comments, but listening to some of the public comments and then listening to just watching some of the feedback on Facebook and some of the other social platforms where people were voicing concerns about this, it seemed like both sides were contributing a little bit to this personality debate. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you 100%. Once it's relegated down to that level, you're not making a good choice. You're not.
Well, and that's what leadership is for, right? Council job number one is to be able to frame a discussion so that they can communicate to the public, here's what's at stake, here's what we're considering, and here's some rationale to consider. Because otherwise it does end up being a free-for-all. You don't give people any parameters. And it's, that was I'm not convinced. I don't have a strong position about residency, which is interesting because there are very few things that I don't have a strong position about, it feels like these days. But, I think that there's research that shows it helps, and there's research that shows that there's no tangible impact, or that actually residency might hinder somebody's ability to be objective. I don't know. But that is a question that needs an answer. And council has to figure out how to have a discussion that answers that question without putting anybody's face to the problem. As soon as they make it a personal issue, this is the rest goes out the window. Just
a sort of quasi-personal philosophical view, I guess. I just think it's easier to have one single blanket policy that covers every single employee, period. Just from an operational standpoint, it's cleaner. It makes things easier to understand. There's no bias. There's no, well, why does he get special treatment as opposed to me? And if you just have one policy where either everybody who's employed by the city has to be a resident of the city, or they don't, one way or another, one policy is so much easier to deal with because it eliminates this.
Right. I can see that, and I think that is, from my point of view, having lived in Geneva and wanting everybody to live in Geneva, I would love to say every city employee should be a Geneva resident, city of Geneva resident, full stop. Mm-hmm. But I also want to be sensitive to the fact that there are maybe certain skill sets you need that, I don't know. I guess residency generally would be my preference. But
and there you go. Like you just mentioned, so you're talking about, you mentioned the skill sets, and you say, well, okay, maybe it would be difficult to fill if you were starting over from ground zero again, and you had to you had to restaff the entire city of Geneva.
Right.
But if you're just, setting the precedent, moving forward, we will only hire city of Geneva residents.
Yeah.
It would, as employees retire, things like that, you set yourself up so that you're slowly and you have time to actually, seek out the right candidates.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be this doomsday scenario where, oh
Everyone
God,
moves,
there aren't good enough, there aren't good enough candidates here. No, like that, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's that bad.
Well, they're definitely going to have to revisit the question, because that, I would assume, is like a baseline question with regard to hiring a new city manager, because
one would hope.
Part of the discussions about
one would hope.
Yeah, part of the discussion about residency through Geneva's history has circulated around the city manager spot, because that was required by the city charter, and for a long time we had a city manager who had an apartment, a P.O. box, a house that wasn't occupied, so the question, and none of this applies to Matt, I don't want to start any rumors, right? Matt is a full-fledged city resident,
yep.
And always has been for the tenure of his position, but prior to him, that was an issue, and I can understand why it touches a nerve. Like, you got to be vested in the place you're governing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we're going to, obviously, all of these issues are going to be things we're going to have to keep discussing in future episodes, because obviously these issues, the way City Council has handled them thus far, they haven't acted in a way that's allowed them to be put away and just bookended them.
Right.
So it'll be a discussion that continues to happen and continues to evolve. What else is on the menu? Controversy in Canandaigua. Have you seen any of this? It's been completely bizarre. So Canandaigua received a community development block grant from the State Office of Community Renewal, which administers the program. The city pursued the grant on behalf of the restaurant owners of Nolan's. The big fire over the summer. It was a really huge loss for the community because it was a restaurant that everybody liked and had been there for a while. The funding totals $416,000, which is going to help the restaurant rebuild. The total cost of the project is $1.6 million. That's an expansion from what their original footprint was. RFPs were sent out December 6th with a January 6th deadline. And the current owners, Nick Vielas and Kate Nolan, opened the restaurant in May 2014. So the reason why I wanted to talk about it was because, again, watching the reaction on social media to it, it's probably my biggest pet peeve when people don't understand like how different assets within government function. Right. And it's partially the people who are executing. It's partially their blame, but it's also partly to blame of the individuals who are saying these things and thinking that, grant money can just be spent on whatever. Right. Every single grant, federal, state, whatever, every grant has a specific use. And this was money, you get some of the people ripping into the project saying, oh my God, this is theft. This should be spent on, and they list off like 20 different things that have nothing to do with the terms and conditions of the actual grant. And I understand that, part of that is the city, the folks who are representing the grant, all of these different players need to better explain what the terms and conditions are, and they need to do a better job of making it clear so that there is no confusion. So, and, we kind of see this repeating situation where in Seneca County a similar scenario played out where the county supervisors were considering usage of TPA funds or funds that were collected through the room tax, possibly using for infrastructure and things like that. And it's just, no, you can't. Those are not the rules. Like the rules say this is what you have to use this type of money for. Right. So play within those boundaries. And when I read a story like this and I see the reaction to it, I'm like, that's something that the city should be excited about. That's something that people should be excited about, because that's tax money helping just a couple people who own a business, couple people who are trying to rebuild something that was happening. And by the way, sinking, $750,000, over $1 million actually, of their own into it. So
yeah, but I agree with you that some of the blame for the reaction falls on the city itself and its way of communicating this, because even in the main article in the Canandaigua Messenger about it, I forget I don't have it right in front of me, but somebody representing the city said, I don't see what the problem is. We're getting a great new business from this. And I thought, oh, no, you're not getting a new business. You're rebuilding an existing business that had a fire. And, I mean, so the argument you're trying to make is you've gotten this grant money to restore a business that people know and love and for some reason didn't have enough insurance money or whatever to rebuild the way they wanted to. So you decided it was a good idea to apply for a grant. All right, you can stand behind that. But don't tell people it's economic development, because it's not you're not creating a new enterprise. Now, you might say, well, if they just stayed shut down, then we wouldn't have had anything. That would have been a net loss. Sure, but that wouldn't have been through any government action, right? That was from a fire. Mm-hmm. So the idea, economic development, the way people understand it, seems to me to be incredibly problematic. So I don't see this grant as an economic development grant. And for the city to try to sell it that way, I can understand why people would respond and say, if you want economic development, you should do this, 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 and this. Because I think, and I'm not saying that's all the comments, but some of the comments in that direction I think were valid, because, the city's misunderstanding economic development if that's what they think the grant is for. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad use of funds. I don't know enough about the rest of the circumstances to make any kind of normative statement about whether or not they're using the money the right way or not. But that is what they applied for, and they were awarded the grant. Mm-hmm. So, I think it is a communication issue. We see this all across, like you said, Seneca County, Geneva, Canandaigua. Local governments struggle to tell people the truth in I don't want to say simple way, but in a straightforward way. I'll
go as far as to say sometimes it's a matter of truth telling. I don't think the intention was to mislead people. I think this was just a straight up communication blunder.
Right.
Like, this was just an error of way. Yeah. There are ways to communicate what your message is, right, and there are ways not to.
Right.
I can understand. I feel like, so playing devil's advocate, I think what they were trying to get at with the economic development arm of this was that it's going to be an expansion beyond what the original business was. Mm-hmm. I think there was some more catering and party mm-hmm. room options and things like that. So, potentially larger business than what the original business was, which kudos, that's fine for them. Good for the people behind it who are, brainstorming that stuff. But no, I agree with what you're saying in the sense that, the communication part of it is so important. Wording is everything. You have to create your message and understand that message before you go pumping it out to the public.
Well, just the fact that you and I have to have a conversation about what we think they meant when they said it.
Right.
No government should have a question mark around its plans, right?
Right.
If they can't tell you in a compelling way why they're doing what they're doing, that's what generates distrust, because mm-hmm. people start to think you're being sketchy, right? Yep. Why can't you just develop your argument in a way that makes sense? Why do I have to figure it out for myself? And that, from, playing the role of just kind of, average resident of the city, when people feel that they have to fill in those blanks, then they think you're up to something. Yeah. And I don't think that's an unreasonable conclusion, because, it's human nature. That's how people operate sometimes. They aren't as straightforward when there is something that they don't want to tell you. But governments don't have that luxury.
Well, and this is something that it's one of those themes that we keep seeing over and over again. And sometimes I feel like when we're going through our setup here for the show and we start to come up with, it's the theme discussions that we wind up having every single week. Mm-hmm. Communication, right. Getting through the process. It just seems to be the one stumbling block that every single local arm of government has.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it really is.
let's jump into something. We haven't talked about anything even remotely like this
Okay.
on this podcast before. So a Cornell grad is suing the university, saying he was discriminated against and denied a hearing following a Title IX investigation into sexual assault allegation. The lawsuit, which was filed 2 weeks ago in U.S. District Court, accuses Sarah Affold, the Title IX coordinator for the University of Cornell, a bunch of different, varies by sex, by ethnicity, religion. The suit doesn't identify any of the people who are involved. It alleges that the student contemplated suicide following the investigation. Also alleges that the graduate passed a polygraph test, which was dismissed by the Title IX coordinator, and that the student was suspended for 1 year and had to undergo inpatient mental health services as a result. All of that reporting is from the Ithaca Journal. But just something really interesting, because I've written a couple columns about this over the last few years. My take has always been, now more than ever, with sexual assault being at the forefront of the discussion, colleges and universities are not positioned well to handle any part of this. These are criminal matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Please let people who actually have the tools and time and resources to investigate these, let them handle it. Don't try to play judge, jury, and execute. And I don't know if it's a little bit of trying to keep it in house to protect to have the PR side of it covered if something goes horribly wrong along the way, or if it's just the ego of the school or university saying, we can do this, we can handle it, we have the resources, or if it's just one or the other or both or parts, or it just, I don't know. To me, this just seems like something that we should never, ever, ever have to be reading about any of these stories, especially for the victims. We shouldn't have to be talking about, victims not feeling comfortable coming forward or being able to report things to their school or to the authorities because their school won't handle it properly. The school shouldn't be handling it, period.
Right. Well, I mean, that, I have to say, my intuition, my gut reaction is that I agree with you, that I think this idea of universities having a panel to handle sexual harassment or assault
isn't that so amusing?
Like, that's exactly where I was going.
Panel.
Is that the idea is that it is about controlling the message. That's how it appears to me. Now, I am sure we are going to get a lot of feedback of people explaining why this is a better procedure, but I don't see it.
I bet they're all employees of various universities around the area.
I mean, I don't see it, because now maybe you could make an argument that, well, people who would feel intimidated about going to the police can at least find an on-campus resource where they can share this information, and then the university's in a position where if several people over the years are making the same claim about one person, then they know they have a problem. Maybe. I mean, I could see how that might happen, but to me that just speaks more about the need for a change in the culture where people don't need to feel like they're going to be beat up and put through complete character assassination for saying something happened. But we're not there yet. So maybe this Title IX process is just a stepping stone towards getting us to a place where somebody would feel comfortable coming forward to an agency that has the ability to handle it. Now, I can also imagine getting some pushback from people saying, yeah, but are police departments the best place to be handling sexual assault and harassment complaints because A, they're already overburdened, B, look at what's happened in departments across the country where there are all these unprocessed rape kits and there's just the cases get lost in the shuffle. There's no easy answer, but I agree with you that part of the discussion needs to be, is a Title IX procedure serving the victims and the people accused well? Are they being served well? Is it fair? Is it thorough? Is it complete? And I think this is not the only issue we've seen with a Title IX application on a campus. I mean,
I feel like we see these stories pretty regularly.
Yeah, HWS,
across the
University of Rochester. I mean, just in our own backyard, right? Now we've got Cornell. So this needs to be a broader conversation. So nobody, in my view, should be saying, yeah, well, we've got Title IX, so we've got it under control. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and so I kind of think like, okay, so if devil's advocate is going to say to me, policing authorities are already overtaxed. They're handling too much. Okay, that just means you have a funding problem on that side of the issue. And if you're spending money, state money or any other money that could possibly be used to help move through these these untested rape kits and everything else that falls into that category, let law enforcement do it. It shouldn't be on the school. The school shouldn't also, I mean, in defense of the schools, they should not have to worry about this. I mean, they should not be the ones tasked with, deciding the guilt or innocence of a person who's committed a crime.
Yeah, and I think colleges and universities have shown that their ability to actually control and influence the behaviors of their students is grossly lacking. I mean, I invite anybody to come to Pulteney Street or Worthington Avenue or South Main Street on a Wednesday, Friday, Saturday night and say whether or not they think HWS has a good handle on the conduct, the non-classroom conduct of their students.
Next, just wait until the weather turns. Wait until like April, early May. Take a ride right up the arterial. You won't have to wait long to see some what is branded unruly college behavior happening.
So if that issue, if the colleges can't make sure that their students traveling to and from downtown aren't vandalizing or committing other issues in the neighborhoods, I'm not sure how we're supposed to be reassured that and I don't mean to pick on HWS, although I mean that's clear, that's the local issue that keeps coming up. But I'm not sure how, with things like that happening at every college and university in the nation, how we're supposed to be reassured that when it comes to dealing with issues of sexual harassment and assault, they're going to have it all figured out. I mean, that's just not practical. So we definitely have to keep talking about it because there are people getting lost in the shuffle who are being unserved or underserved for really bad issues, and on both sides, right? Like, it's got to be a fair process. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't want to say it's equal on both sides, but I'm just saying you have to have protections both for the people coming forward and the people being accused, because that is how you ensure a just outcome.
Yeah, and I'll say this just happened to be the headline that popped up at the right time when we were going through the scripting process. Right. We aren't defending the person who was accused in any way, shape, or form. It's just one of many. It's all the time, and it blows my mind that this, which something to me seems so black and white. It doesn't seem like there should be any confusion on this topic. It should be decidedly one way. And it should not be in the hands of universities.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I see it as that black and white, because I do think it's a complicated topic. But I agree with you that it is clear that we've not found a suitable solution yet. So acknowledging that is kind of step one, I think.
But is the Title IX portion of this, though, the acknowledgement? The acknowledgement's happened. Because otherwise we wouldn't be in the scenario where you're having these panels and things like that. To me, it is black and white in that it's just these universities with as many resources and with as much money and backing and everything that they have, they're in over their heads on when it comes to issues like this.
Yes.
So
yes, but that doesn't mean, to me, the fact that they're not doing it perfectly now doesn't mean they don't have a role to play at all. I just think what's happening right now is not the solution.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Jumping into our next topic, which is like the Biggest
okay.
one. As if we haven't had enough big issues this week. So last week, an estimated 250 people showed up to hear about a proposed incinerator, which would be developed on a 48.3-acre parcel within the former Seneca Army Depot. Worth noting that this is not the same property in particular, which is being leased by Earl Martin from the Seneca County IDA. This property is owned and operated by Seneca Depot LLC, who has been seeking a purchaser for some time. The Romulus Planning Board heard the presentation led by attorney Alan Knopf, who is representing Circular Energy. Zoning in Romulus currently prevents these facilities from being constructed, which is why a special use permit is being sought. Knopf said that every environmentalist should support this $365 million proposal. Construction would begin in December 2019 and be completed exactly 2 years later, roughly December 2021. A reported 80-ish jobs would be created by the facility, and it would burn up to 2,600 tons of trash per day. Yum. Isn't it just incredible? Like, on the heels of, and I can totally get behind economic development, and I can totally get behind all of the jobs and all of the good things that come out of any sort of like development process or project, but it just seems like this is too bizarre. Like, why an incinerator in Romulus of all places?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't even get behind the economic development argument because...
Oh, not with this project.
Right.
I mean, in general, when somebody says, oh, Project A will bring 80 jobs.
Yeah,
normally
but
you can get behind jobs.
I mean, yeah, not all jobs are created equal, right? It's hard to get excited about the idea of somebody shoveling garbage into a fire. But
right.
I think that I wrote my column about this, which doesn't come out till tomorrow, so I'm going to preempt myself. But what got me about that meeting is that, this argument that if you're a real environmentalist, you would support this, is built on so many flawed assumptions.
It's a gutsy thing to say.
And false dilemmas, right? Because what was the argument? This is better than just bringing the trash in and throwing it on the ground. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Well, we don't want to do that either. Yep. This is better for creating energy than fracking or coal. Okay, again, we're not going to do that either, And then what was there was another one that they said that just cracked me up, and I'm losing it right now. I'm sure I'll remember it in a second. But I just sat there thinking, this is crazy. Plus, I mean, I have to say, I'm sure this irony was not lost on you either. But I'm sitting there watching the presentation, and I'm watching them have all these technical difficulties with their equipment when they're trying to tell us that this is going to be the most technologically advanced equipment that will never have a problem. And I just thought, oh, okay, probably like your projector right now or your PowerPoint. But I'm sure everything will just go swimmingly. But I know what the other one was. The guy who owns the property now, right, saying, well, we wanted to do a lot of stuff, but the problem is you can't get power there, so we have to burn garbage. And I just thought, wow, that's a mighty leap to make. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are a lot of people who can't get power very easily out to a remote place. I don't think the next thing they think is that they ought to start burning some garbage.
So let me jump in quick there. One of the interesting discussions that I've heard repeatedly in Seneca County, just from covering the Seneca County Board of Supervisors for so long, about the depot property as a whole, things have not happened there because of the various lack of infrastructure or anything else. The workforce has typically been the issue for Seneca County. When these companies come in and do their evaluations, the workforce typically does not line up with what they want to see or with what they would like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That is completely independent of it doesn't matter if you have all the electricity in the world out there, if you have all the water, all of the access in the world. That's not going to change what is out there. And you're also not going to change the fact that it isn't connected or anywhere near the thruway, which is pretty important when it comes to any sort of economic development, especially when you're talking about At the depot, you're talking about what would probably be some bigger, warehouse type things, and it's just not. It isn't right for that. It's a really tough sell. Like that piece of property is a really tough sell. And while this might be one of the only things that may have found interest in going in there in recent years, it's no reason to say, well, this is it. This is the solution. Right. This fixes everything. Right. Go ahead. I cut you off.
No, you didn't. You didn't. And I mean, that's how it goes, right? We're having a good conversation. I don't feel cut off. But I think that, and on that electricity issue, right? It's not that it is impossible to get power there. It's that it is not a priority for anybody to pay to bring in power. And what that really means is that the guy making that argument is just nicely trying to package up what he's really saying, which is, I would like to externalize the cost of actually making this happen to the community through the environmental, social justice, and other issues that come with importing trash and burning it, because that will help me achieve my goals without spending money I don't want to spend. And that always seems to just get glossed over. Like, we talk about the market won't bear this, or it doesn't make sense to do that. Well, what people are saying is it doesn't make a profit to do that right now. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean that we live, it's a Martian atmosphere that won't support any electrical poles. I mean, that is not what we're dealing with. It's all about money. Mm-hmm. And even saying that this is a $365 million project, they came out and said in the presentation that they would be seeking a host benefit agreement, and we all know what that is. That is a pilot. That is a way of saying we're going to take an offset in the taxes to pay you directly in these other ways, and that's not okay.
Well, to me, I don't like the idea of introducing the concept of a host benefit agreement, only because, especially at this early stage, because it kind of begins the process of removing the objectivity from the actual process of reviewing what the proposal is, right? So, it becomes subjective. You may think that this is a great idea in exchange for $1.5 million a year, but I may think it's a terrible idea and it's going to be awful. It's just bad. No, we can't do this. Right. And that's the problem, right?
You're right. Yes.
And I will say this, my other big concern, and the Seneca County Board of Supervisors are looking at a proposed local law, ironically at least partially written by Alan Knopf when he represented Seneca County last year against Seneca Meadows. There's been a little bit of discussion about it, and some folks out there trying to rally the troops to get people out to this board meeting to say, hey, pass this law. It could be the thing that stops this proposal from coming to fruition. Right. Wrong. Completely wrong. This local law, literally, it's nice, but it's symbolic. It doesn't stop. It gives, and I actually asked Steve Churchill about this, who was the one who proposed it at the last committee meeting. And he understands that, and he says, well, it provides an out for the community if they don't want to be the one to say, no, this isn't going, we don't want to do this. It gives them the opportunity to say, well, Seneca County has a policy on this, and we're just going to defer to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's commendable, but the message that's going out to some people is that this could stop. When you use words like that, it makes people think that, this law passes and this project stops immediately. Wrong. That's not, because of the way New York is set up. Home rule wins. And I asked County Manager John Shepard, and he basically said the Romulus Planning Committee is the first and possibly highest hurdle to clear. After that, there would be a zoning, go before the zoning board. The county planning board would even have their opportunity to ultimately review or give their declaration on it. But even that, according to the county manager, it would have no impact. The county planning board could say no. Right. And if the Romulus Town Planning Board prefers to move forward,
Right.
then they get it.
Well, and I think the developers, I mean, right, they've got the money. They don't come into this not knowing what the game's going to be. But they clearly know that the Romulus Planning Board is the highest hurdle, because their framework for their argument also talked about, we know you don't think this is allowed, but really it is, because there's this caveat for renewable energy. And that, I almost burst out laughing when they said that, because, right, the argument that trash is renewable energy means that because there's a never-ending stream of trash. I mean, that is not the definition of a renewable energy source. Mm-hmm. So they already are trying to check those boxes of putting their presentation in a framework that would allow a planning board that has to follow a very formal process of either approving or denying something, to try and make an argument that I guess would meet the standard, but it clearly doesn't. So for me, I feel like the planning board, operating in good faith, has a really easy job, because they can just say, no, it's inconsistent, it's not allowed, full stop. But it remains to be seen if they will do that or not.
Mm-hmm. So we're running short on time here. Let's jump into our hits and misses for the day. Obviously, we'll be talking about this incinerator project.
Right.
Even the planning board admitted this was going to be a long and arduous process, so they will be mulling over this for the next several months, and subsequently so will we. I'll go first on hits and misses.
All right. I just had to look my notes. Okay, I got them.
So my hit is the Seneca County Board of Supervisors. It looks like last week I wrote about the Chamber of Commerce, the Seneca County Chamber of Commerce, and receiving their funding from the room tax, which I alluded to earlier. It appears as though the Board of Supervisors will vote through that those dollars, that 90% threshold, and the funds that ultimately should be spent on those efforts. Really, it shouldn't have been this difficult to get to this point. Okay. Stick to the script. If you want to work on things like infrastructure, if you want to work on things like advanced sewer projects and things like that, work on them. But don't work on them under the guise of taking away from another portion of what would be the budget, because in my mind, that gives you a crutch to say, well, when it doesn't get done, right, well, we tried, but we couldn't. No, this doesn't constitute a real try. Right. So that's why that's my hit moving forward, and who knows, it might revert back to a miss at some point. My miss just popped up in the newspaper a few days ago. The Seneca Falls Town Board tried to hire someone for the network administrator position. Yes. Without advertising it. The person also happened to be the town attorney's son. Right. I will simply put an asterisk next to that and say that, taking the personality out of it, it's a miss because you didn't advertise for it, and it's a miss because you should understand the optics as an elected official of what that looks like. Yep. And you should understand that even if he is the most qualified person in the world, you can't just abruptly pull it up like that, especially when things are as divisive as they are right now in Seneca Falls. So that's my take, and I won't go into it any further than that. We'll see how the town board handles this moving forward, and who knows, we'll probably be talking about that at some point in the near future. What about you, though?
Okay, well, my hit was actually going to be Steve Churchill introducing that resolution. Not because I think it solves the incinerator problem altogether, but I just wanted to highlight, since he's going off of the board, that Steve Churchill has just been, in my view, an amazing representative for the people of Seneca County, because he has taken unpopular positions. He has and has not shied away from them, but he is not combative. He is not mean. He just explains what his reasoning is. He is willing to go to the mat on that reasoning and back it up. He's willing to change his mind if it turns out something, there's new information that alters his his perspective. He is just, I have found him to just be a great legislator. I don't know him well, but just watching him, I think with all the stuff going on lately, it's nice to see somebody who's doing things right, and I'm sad to see him go. So it's kind of a reluctant last hit for Steve Churchill.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. My miss would be an example of maybe what's not good policy. In Geneva, they attempted at this last meeting to bring up a resolution opposing the incinerator, taking a position about that. And the response of one counselor in particular was to invite the incinerator people in to give their presentation before Geneva City Council. And I just want to say that's a miss. I'm generally all for dialogue, but it's a miss for the following reason. To be a leader means to communicate to the community not just what you support, but the things you're willing to say no to. And the fact that the city council could not just come out and say, it's bad for the lake, it's bad for the air, it's bad for the people, we hear what's happening. I mean, the city council opposed the ethanol plant. They could have done that. So I just find that to be a huge miss, because it shows that Geneva is really lacking leadership.
Yeah. All right.
That's my miss.
Well, that's it for this week. Boy, that was a packed hour.
Yeah, it sure was.
Okay.
Goodbye.
So we'll be back in a couple more weeks. That's going to do it for today's show. I'd like to thank FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible, and remind our listeners that all of our episodes are available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.